Nestled on the southeastern coast of New Zealand's South Island, Dunedin is a city defined by its rich Scottish heritage and its vibrant academic heart. It is a place where historic Victorian and Edwardian architecture meets the youthful energy of thousands of students. At the center of this cultural landscape sits the University of Otago, the oldest university in the country, renowned for its rigorous academic programs and tight-knit campus community. For many young New Zealanders, moving to Dunedin to study is a rite of passage, a time of intellectual awakening and newfound independence. In the mid-2000s, this picturesque city was the backdrop for the life of a remarkably talented young woman named Sophie Elliott. Sophie was the embodiment of promise. At 22 years old, she had already distinguished herself as an exceptional scholar, completing an honors degree in economics. Her mind was sharp, her work ethic unparalleled, and her future seemed entirely boundless. She had just secured a highly coveted position at the Treasury in the nation's capital, Wellington. It was a role that perfectly matched her analytical brilliance and her desire to make a meaningful impact on her country's economic landscape. Yet, the story of Sophie Elliott is not just a chronicle of academic triumph. It is a profound tragedy that shook the foundations of the New Zealand justice system, exposing fatal flaws in centuries-old legal doctrines and sparking a nationwide movement for change. This is the story of an investigation that relied on meticulous forensic analysis to uncover the truth, a courtroom battle that tested the limits of legal ethics, and a family's unwavering determination to ensure that their daughter's legacy would protect others from experiencing a similar fate. To understand the depth of the loss, one must first understand who Sophie Elliott was. Raised in a loving home by her parents, Leslie and Gil Elliott, Sophie grew up in a supportive environment that nurtured her curiosity and her drive. She was an energetic, compassionate, and fiercely independent individual. Friends and professors alike noted her ability to tackle complex economic theories with both precision and creativity. Economics is not merely the study of money. It is the study of human behavior, resource allocation, and the intricate systems that govern societies. Sophie excelled in this demanding field, earning top marks and the respect of her peers. Her academic journey was characterized by a relentless pursuit of excellence. She was not content to simply pass her classes. She sought to master the material, to understand the underlying principles, and to apply them to real-world problems. As the year 2007 drew to a close, Sophie was preparing for the next major chapter of her life. The transition from university student to professional economist was imminent. Her bedroom in her family's Dunedin home was filled with moving boxes, each one representing a step toward her bright future in Wellington. The excitement in the Elliott household was palpable. Leslie and Gil were immensely proud of their daughter, watching her meticulously organize her belongings, her books, and her dreams. However, the university environment that had fostered Sophie's intellectual growth also introduced her to a complex and ultimately destructive dynamic. During her time at the University of Otago, Sophie crossed paths with Clayton Weatherston. Weatherston was a 32-year-old tutor and lecturer in the economics department. In the academic hierarchy, he occupied a position of authority and influence. He was known among students and faculty for his intellect, but also for a certain arrogance and a rigid need for control. The relationship that developed between Sophie and Weatherston was marked by a significant power imbalance. He was a decade older, an instructor in her chosen field, and deeply embedded in the academic circles she was navigating. Initially, the connection might have seemed intellectually stimulating, a meeting of two sharp minds. But as forensic psychologists and behavioral analysts would later point out, relationships founded on such stark imbalances of power often harbor hidden dangers. Over the course of their involvement, the dynamic shifted from mutual interest to coercive control. Coercive control is a pattern of behavior designed to isolate, manipulate, and dominate another person. It does not always manifest as physical aggression. Often, it begins with subtle criticisms, unreasonable demands, and emotional manipulation. Weatherston's behavior towards Sophie became increasingly erratic and possessive. He struggled with her independence, her success, and her impending departure from Dunedin. Sophie, recognizing the unhealthy nature of the relationship, made the courageous decision to end it. Breaking away from a controlling partner is notoriously one of the most difficult and dangerous phases in an abusive relationship. The loss of control often triggers an escalation in the perpetrator's behavior. Sophie was focused on her future, setting boundaries, and preparing to leave the city. She believed that the physical distance of moving to Wellington would provide the emotional distance she needed to finally be free of Weatherston's influence. The 9th of January, 2008, was meant to be a day of transition and anticipation. Sophie was in her bedroom at her family home, packing the last of her belongings. Her mother, Leslie, was in the house, assisting with the preparations. The atmosphere was focused on the upcoming move. Unexpectedly, Clayton Weatherston arrived at the front door. He carried with him a seemingly innocuous item, a gift he claimed he wanted to return to Sophie. Despite the recent breakup and the tension between them, he was allowed inside. It is a common human instinct to avoid conflict and maintain a sense of normalcy, especially in the safety of one's own home. Weatherston made his way to Sophie's bedroom. Once inside, the door was shut and locked from the inside. What transpired next was a rapid and devastating sequence of events. Sophie Elliott, standing outside the closed door, heard the sudden sounds of a struggle and her daughter's cries for help. Panic set in immediately. Leslie attempted to force the door open, pounding on the wood and demanding entry, but the lock held fast. The psychological terror of those moments, of a mother separated from her child by a mere piece of wood, is unimaginable. Realizing she could not breach the door, Leslie immediately contacted emergency services. The response from the New Zealand police was swift. Officers arrived at the Elliott residence, quickly assessing the situation and forcing entry into the locked bedroom. When law enforcement officers breached the door, they were met with a scene that would require the utmost professional composure to process. Sophie Elliott had sustained fatal injuries. Clayton Weatherston was present in the room, essentially caught in the act. The officers immediately secured the suspect, taking him into custody without further incident. The primary focus for the first responders shifted to securing the environment and preserving the integrity of the scene for forensic analysis. In any criminal investigation, the crime scene is a fragile repository of information. Every object, every spatial relationship, and every trace of physical evidence holds a piece of the narrative. The police established a strict perimeter, ensuring that only authorized personnel, such as crime scene investigators and forensic pathologists, could enter. The clinical reality of the investigation began. Forensic photographers systematically documented the room, capturing wide-angle shots to establish the layout and close-up macro photography to record specific details. Bloodstain pattern analysis played a crucial role in understanding the mechanics of the event. Experts in this field do not simply look at the presence of blood. They analyze the size, shape, distribution, and location of the stains to reconstruct the sequence of actions. By examining the patterns, investigators could determine the positions of the victim and the perpetrator throughout the altercation, providing objective data that would later prove invaluable in court. The physical evidence collected was meticulously catalogued. Investigators located the weapon used in the attack. Crucially, they also examined the bag Weatherston had brought with him to the house. Inside, they found evidence that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the investigation. The weapon had been concealed within his belongings prior to his arrival. This single piece of forensic evidence was a cornerstone of the case. It transformed the narrative from a spontaneous loss of control to a calculated, premeditated act. While the physical crime scene provided the mechanics of the crime, the digital landscape offered a window into the perpetrator's state of mind. Digital forensics has become an indispensable tool in modern criminal investigations. Detectives seized computers, mobile devices, and accessed university servers to reconstruct the digital communications between Sophie and Weatherston. The data extraction process revealed a voluminous exchange of emails and messages. Analysts painstakingly reviewed these communications to establish a timeline of the relationship's deterioration, carefully logging timestamps and metadata to build an undeniable sequence of events. The digital footprint painted a clear picture of Weatherston's escalating obsession. His messages exhibited a profound sense of entitlement and a deep-seated resentment towards Sophie's academic success and her decision to end the relationship. The language used in these digital artifacts was analyzed by forensic psychologists to build a behavioral profile of the suspect. The psychological profile highlighted traits consistent with severe narcissism. Narcissistic personality structures are often characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. When a highly narcissistic individual experiences rejection or a perceived slight, it can trigger what psychologists term a narcissistic injury. This psychological wound can result in profound rage, as the individual's fragile self-esteem is threatened. Weatherston's inability to accept that Sophie was moving on, both professionally and personally, created a volatile psychological environment. The forensic evidence, both physical and digital, converged to support a single, unified theory of the crime. Weatherston had not acted out of sudden, uncontrollable emotion. He had planned his actions, brought a weapon to the scene, and executed his plan with chilling deliberation. The legal proceedings that followed the investigation became one of the most closely watched and controversial trials in modern New Zealand history. The prosecution, armed with an overwhelming amount of forensic and digital evidence, charged Clayton Weatherston with the murder of Sophie Elliott. The burden of proof in a murder trial requires the prosecution to establish beyond a reasonable doubt not only that the defendant caused the death of the victim, but also that they possessed the requisite intent, or mens rea, to commit murder. Given that Weatherston was apprehended at the scene, the identity of the perpetrator was not in question. The entire legal battle hinged on his state of mind at the time of the offense. The defense strategy centered on a highly controversial and archaic legal doctrine known as the partial defense of provocation. To understand the gravity of this defense, it is necessary to examine its historical context. The provocation defense originated in English common law centuries ago, during a time when honor and reputation were considered paramount. The law reasoned that if a person was subjected to an action or insult so severe that it would cause an ordinary person to lose their self-control, the subsequent lethal act should be considered manslaughter rather than murder. In the context of the Weatherston trial, the defense argued that Sophie had verbally insulted him and physically confronted him with a pair of scissors, causing him to experience a sudden and temporary loss of self-control. By utilizing this defense, Weatherston was effectively attempting to shift a portion of the blame onto his victim. This legal strategy required the defense to focus intensely on Sophie's alleged behavior in her final moments. For the Elliott family, sitting in the courtroom day after day, this was an agonizing experience. They were forced to endure a process where their daughter's character was scrutinized and distorted, while she was unable to defend herself. The trial essentially put the victim on trial, a phenomenon that generated widespread public outrage. The prosecution's task was to dismantle the provocation defense by proving that Weatherston's actions were deliberate, calculated, and entirely disproportionate to any alleged provocation. They relied heavily on the meticulously gathered forensic evidence. The prosecution brought forward expert witnesses, including forensic pathologists and crime scene reconstruction specialists. These experts presented the jury with a clinical, objective analysis of the physical evidence. They demonstrated how the bloodstain patterns and the nature of the injuries contradicted Weatherston's account of a spontaneous, chaotic struggle. The sheer number of injuries sustained by the victim indicated a sustained and deliberate attack, rather than a momentary loss of control. Furthermore, the prosecution highlighted the crucial piece of evidence discovered by the initial investigators: the weapon brought to the scene in Weatherston's bag. The prosecution argued powerfully that a person does not accidentally pack a lethal weapon when visiting an ex-partner to return a gift. The presence of the weapon demonstrated forethought and preparation. directly undermining the claim of sudden provocation. The digital forensics also played a pivotal role in the courtroom. The prosecution read excerpts from Weatherston's emails and communications, exposing his deep-seated resentment and his inability to accept rejection. Cross-examination of the defendant was a masterclass in legal precision. The prosecuting attorneys methodically challenged Weatherston's narrative, pointing out inconsistencies in his timeline and highlighting his lack of genuine remorse. His demeanor on the stand, characterized by many observers as arrogant and detached, further eroded the credibility of his defense. The jury was presented with a stark choice. They had to weigh the defense's narrative of a man pushed beyond his breaking point against the prosecution's mountain of forensic evidence, pointing to a premeditated and controlled act of violence. After weeks of intense testimony and legal arguments, the jury retreated to deliberate. The nation waited with bated breath. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the verdict was clear and definitive. They rejected the provocation defense entirely. Clayton Weatherston was found guilty of the murder of Sophie Elliott. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. While the guilty verdict provided a measure of legal closure for the Elliott family, the trial itself exposed a deep and troubling flaw in the New Zealand justice system. The public was appalled that a perpetrator could use a victim's alleged words or minor actions to justify a lethal response, effectively victim blaming in the highest court of the land. The outrage was not merely an emotional reaction, it was a demand for systemic reform. Legal scholars, domestic violence advocates, and the general public united in their condemnation of the provocation defense. The defense was widely criticized as being inherently biased, often used to excuse violence committed by men against women, particularly in the context of intimate partner violence and relationship breakdowns. The argument was that in a modern, civilized society, no insult or minor altercation should ever be considered a legal justification for a loss of self-control resulting in a fatality. The mobilization of public opinion was extraordinary. Petitions were circulated, editorials were written, and citizens contacted their members of parliament demanding immediate action. The New Zealand government, recognizing the validity of the public's concerns and the archaic nature of the law, acted with unprecedented speed. In 2009, the New Zealand Parliament introduced the Crimes Provocation Repeal Amendment Act. The parliamentary debates surrounding the bill were solemn and reflective, acknowledging the tragic catalyst for the reform. Lawmakers spoke of the need to protect the dignity of victims and to ensure that perpetrators are held fully accountable for their actions, regardless of their emotional state. The legislation was passed, effectively abolishing the partial defense of provocation from New Zealand law. This was a monumental legal milestone. It meant that future defendants could no longer use the victim's behavior as a shield to reduce a murder charge to manslaughter. The law had finally caught up with modern understandings of psychology, responsibility, and human rights. This sweeping legislative change is a direct and enduring testament to the impact of Sophie Elliott's case. Her tragedy forced a nation to look in the mirror and demand a higher standard of justice. The conclusion of the criminal trial and the subsequent change in the law did not mark the end of the Elliott family's journey. Leslie Elliott, Sophie's mother, channeled her unimaginable grief into a powerful force for social change. She recognized that the warning signs of coercive control and abuse are often subtle and misunderstood, particularly by young people navigating their first serious relationships. Determined to prevent other families from experiencing the same devastating loss, Leslie founded the Sophie Elliott Foundation. The foundation's mission was clear and focused: to educate young people about the signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships. Leslie understood that early intervention and education were the most effective tools against interpersonal violence. She partnered with the New Zealand Police and the Ministry of Social Development to create a nationwide educational program called Loves Me Not. This program was designed specifically for high school students. It provided a safe and structured environment for young people to discuss relationship dynamics, consent, and the red flags of controlling behavior. The curriculum emphasized that love should never involve fear, isolation, or manipulation. Leslie Elliott traveled tirelessly across the country, visiting schools, community centers, and universities. She shared Sophie's story with remarkable courage and vulnerability. By personalizing the statistics of domestic violence, she connected with students on a profound level. She taught them to recognize the early signs of abuse, such as excessive jealousy, monitoring of communications, and attempts to distance a partner from friends and family. Furthermore, Leslie authored a book titled Sophie's Legacy, detailing her daughter's life, the harrowing experience of the trial, and the critical importance of relationship education. The book served as both a tribute to Sophie and a vital resource for parents and educators. Through the Foundation's relentless efforts, thousands of young New Zealanders have been equipped with the knowledge and the vocabulary to identify toxic relationships and to seek help before a situation escalates. Sophie Elliott's brilliance and potential were tragically cut short, but through the unwavering dedication of her mother, her spirit continues to protect and empower countless others. In 2015, Leslie Elliott's extraordinary contributions to the community were formally recognized when she was made a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit. It was a fitting acknowledgement of a woman who turned the darkest moment of her life into a beacon of hope for an entire nation. The investigation into the murder of Sophie Elliott serves as a powerful case study in the evolution and application of modern forensic science. It highlights the critical shift from relying solely on eyewitness testimony and subjective interpretations to utilizing objective, scientific data to establish the truth. In decades past, a case involving an unwitnessed altercation behind a locked door might have resulted in a legal stalemate, heavily reliant on the surviving perpetrator's narrative. However, the rigorous application of bloodstain pattern analysis, forensic pathology, and digital forensics provided an undeniable counter-narrative to the defense's claims. The physical evidence spoke for the victim when she could no longer speak for herself. Furthermore, the case underscores the vital role of forensic psychology in understanding the motivations behind violent crime. By analyzing the digital footprint and the behavioral patterns leading up to the event, investigators were able to expose the underlying mechanisms of coercive control and narcissistic injury. This psychological insight was crucial not only for securing a conviction, but also for educating the public about the hidden dangers within seemingly normal relationships. The intersection of hard physical science and behavioral analysis proved to be an insurmountable hurdle for a defense strategy built on deflection and victim blaming. The legacy of this investigation is a reaffirmation of the scientific method within the criminal justice system. It serves as a reminder to law enforcement professionals worldwide that meticulous scene preservation, comprehensive data extraction, and unbiased analysis are the cornerstones of a fair and effective legal process. The truth, encoded in physical traces and digital fragments, can withstand the most aggressive legal challenges if it is properly collected and expertly interpreted. The story of Sophie Elliott is a narrative of profound contrasts. It is a story of a brilliant young mind extinguished far too soon, and a legal system forced to confront its own inadequacies. It is a testament to the chilling reality of coercive control, yet equally a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love and a community's demand for change. The city of Dunedin, with its historic university and vibrant student life, will forever carry the memory of the bright economic scholar who was destined for greatness. The abolition of the Provocation defense stands as a permanent legal monument to her memory, ensuring that the justice system in New Zealand requires absolute accountability for acts of lethal violence. The educational programs born from this tragedy continue to ripple outward, teaching new generations the fundamental rights to safety, respect, and autonomy within their relationships. As we reflect on the meticulous forensic work that uncovered the truth, the grueling courtroom battle that tested the resolve of a grieving family, and the sweeping legal reforms that followed, we are left to consider the broader implications for our own communities. We must ask ourselves, how can we better recognize the subtle signs of coercion before they escalate? And are we doing enough to ensure that our legal systems truly protect the vulnerable rather than excusing the powerful?